Harlen Brooks was tying his son's shoelaces on the sidelines of the dusty soccer field when a woman sat down beside him, dressed like she didn't belong anywhere near orange slices and folding chairs. "Your kid's number 7, she asked, her voice low, confident. "Yeah," Harlen replied, brushing the sweat off his neck with the back of his hand. "That's Nolan, yours." The woman pointed to a little girl in pigtails chasing the ball like her life depended on it. "That one, Nyla." Harlen chuckled. "She's fierce." "So is your son," she said, glancing sideways at him. "They're the only ones actually running." He smiled, the kind that made his eyes crinkle but didn't quite reach his mouth. "Gotta teach 'em young. Effort matters, even if you're 5. "I like that," she said, holding out her hand. "Mira Olson." He shook it, surprised by how soft hers felt against his calloused palm. Harlen Brooks." They watched in silence for a minute. Just the sound of kids yelling, parents chatting, and the occasional whistle from the high school kid pretending to be a coach. "So what do you do, Harlen?" she asked casually. "Construction." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The frayed sleeves and the concrete dust on his boots said it all. "Mostly part-time right now. Jobs are slow." "Ah," Mira nodded. "That must be tough." Harlen shrugged. "It is what it is. Nolan's my priority. Everything else can wait." She looked at him a moment longer than necessary, but he didn't notice. He was watching his son score a goal and jump with both arms in the air like he'd just won the World Cup. "You don't see that often," she said. "What?" "A man who's fully present. Most dads are scrolling or talking about fantasy football. You're actually here." He looked at her then, eyebrows raised. "That's kind of the whole point, right? Show up, be there." Mira smiled, but didn't respond. Her phone buzzed in her designer tote, and she silenced it without even checking. Her assistant had been blowing up her phone all morning about a board meeting she was supposed to call into. But for some reason, she didn't feel like being Mira Olson, CEO of Olson Dynamics, right now. "Do you want a juice box?" Harlen asked, reaching into a battered cooler and pulling out 2. She blinked, then laughed. "Sure, why not?" He handed her one, and she took it like it was a glass of champagne. They sat there, drinking juice boxes like kids, watching their children run wild. And for a moment, Mira forgot she had 3 boardrooms waiting for her approval. "You always come alone?" he asked. "Yeah, Nyla's dad's not in the picture." "Same with Nalan's mom. She left when he was 2. They didn't say anything for a while after that. The whistle blew, signaling the end of practice. The kids came running over, panting and sweaty. Nalan threw himself into Harlan's arms, laughing. Nyla ran to Mira, who crouched down and hugged her tightly, whispering something into her ear that made the little girl giggle. "See you next week?" Harlen asked, standing with Nalan on his hip. Mira nodded. "Yes, definitely." He turned to walk away, not noticing the way she watched him. Not noticing that her assistant was still calling. That the woman who just accepted a juice box from a man with dust on his boots was worth over $900 million and had just rescheduled a meeting to talk to him. Harlen was clueless. And Mira was already falling. The next week, Mira wore sneakers to the field. No heels, no designer coat, just jeans, a t-shirt, and a ponytail. Harlen noticed, though he didn't say anything. He just grinned and offered her the cooler again. "Juice box?" he asked. "Wouldn't miss it." They sat closer this time. Their knees brushed once, and neither of them moved. "You ever take Nalan anywhere fun, like just the 2 of you?" she asked. He nodded. "Sometimes, when I've saved up. Took him to the zoo last month. He lost his mind over the giraffes." She laughed. "I love that." "Yeah, he deserves the world. Just, I wish I could give him more, you know." Mira looked at him, really looked at him. The rough stubble on his jaw, the tired eyes that still lit up when he laughed, the way he talked about his son like he was the best thing he'd ever made. "You're giving him the most important thing," she said. "You're there." He turned to her, surprised by the softness in her voice. "What about you? You always this philosophical at soccer practice." She laughed, only when there's juice boxes involved. That night, Mira didn't go home to her penthouse. She drove around aimlessly for an hour thinking about Harlen, about how he didn't know who she was and how much she liked that, about the way he looked at his son like the world revolved around him, about how she didn't feel like a CEO when she was next to him, just a woman who didn't want to miss next Saturday. They kept meeting every week. Juice boxes turned into coffee. Coffee turned into long conversations about everything parenting, childhoods, dreams they gave up on, and the ones they still held onto. Harlen never asked what she did, and Mira never offered. One Saturday, it rained. Practice was canceled, but Mira still came to the field. Harlen was already there, sitting in his truck with Nolan in the backseat watching cartoons on a tablet. "You showed up," he said when she tapped on the window. "Of course I did." They sat in the truck for 2 hours, talking about nothing and everything. Nolan fell asleep in the backseat. Mira's hand brushed Harlen's, and this time, he didn't pull away. "You're something else," he said, looking at her like he was trying to figure her out. "So are you," she whispered. He leaned in, just a little. Not enough. But it was enough to make her heart race. Enough to make her want to kiss him. Enough to make her terrified of what would happen when he found out who she really was. Because Mira Olson, the woman slowly falling for the poor dad with calloused hands, was lying by omission. And Harlen Brooks had no idea the woman he was starting to fall for ran one of the biggest tech companies in the country. The following Saturday morning, Mira leaned against the hood of her car in a quiet corner of the parking lot, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She'd arrived earlier than usual, and it wasn't for the soccer. She scanned the field, her eyes searching past the bouncing children and chatting parents until she saw Harlen's pickup roll into its usual spot. He got out wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans with a tier just above the knee. Nolan climbed down after him, tugging on his dad's wrist with a grin that made Mira's chest tighten. She approached them before she could talk herself out of it. "Cold morning," she said, holding out the extra cup. Harlen blinked, surprised. "You brought me coffee." Mira shrugged, feigning nonchalance though her pulse had picked up. "You always bring juice boxes. Figured I owe you." He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. "Thanks, that's thoughtful." She smiled but didn't respond. Nolan was already darting toward the field, shouting something about being goalie. They watched him run for a moment. "I've been meaning to ask," Mira said, turning toward him. "Ever thought about coaching?" Harlen raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "You're here every week. You know half the rules better than the guy with the whistle. The kids already listen to you." He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "I don't know. I've never coached anything before." "That doesn't mean you wouldn't be good at it." He looked at her, then back at the field. "Maybe, if they needed someone." "They do," she said, sipping her coffee. "I asked." His eyes flicked back to her, curious now. "You asked?" "I thought it might be something you'd like." She hesitated, then added, "You light up when you talk to those kids, Harlen. That kind of thing matters." He stared at her for a second, something unreadable in his expression. Then he looked down at his coffee, exhaled through his nose. "No one's told me that in a long time." Mira didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later, while the kids ran drills, Harlen knelt beside Nolan, tying his shoelace tighter to keep it from dragging. Mira watched from a distance, arms crossed against the wind. One of the other moms sidled up next to her, a woman who always wore workout gear that looked more expensive than it needed to be. "So," the woman began, eyeing Mira's neutral-toned coat and sleek bun, "you and the Brooks guy, what's going on there?" Mira didn't look at her. "That's between me and him." The woman laughed, clearly amused. "I'm just saying he's sweet, but don't expect anything fancy. He's not exactly rolling in it." Mira turned then, slowly. "I'm not looking for fancy." The other mom blinked, caught off guard. Mira held her gaze for a beat longer before turning back to the field. When practice ended, Harlen slung Nolan's backpack over his shoulder and joined her near the fence. "You doing anything later?" he asked, adjusting the strap. "Depends," Mira said. "Are you offering a better option than spreadsheets?" He chuckled. "I was thinking there's this fall festival a few towns over. It's small, nothing big, but there's hot cider and Nolan's been asking about the hayrides." Mira tilted her head. "You inviting me or just mentioning it?" Harlen hesitated, then met her eyes. "I'm inviting you." She smiled slowly. "Then yes, I'd like that." They drove separately, Mira following his truck down winding roads lined with trees just starting to turn. When they arrived, Nolan ran ahead to the pumpkin patch while Harlen paid for their wristbands. Mira took it all in the families, the smell of cinnamon and wood smoke, the sound of a local band playing folk music near the barn. "This is cozy," she said, stepping beside him. He glanced at her. "Not too boring for you?" "No," she said. "This is exactly what I didn't know I needed." They walked together, occasionally brushing shoulders as they watched Nolan climb hay bales. At one point, he called out to Harlen to join him, and Mira watched as Harlen climbed up beside his son without hesitation, laughing as Nolan tried to push him off. "Your turn," Nolan shouted, pointing at Mira. "I don't think those boots were made for hay," Harlen said, grinning. Mira huffed, "They're fine." She climbed up, slipping once before Harlen caught her elbow. "Careful." "I'm good," she muttered, cheeks flushed. They sat at the top, the town stretching out below them, leaves rustling in the breeze. "You always this fearless?" Harlen asked. "Only when I'm trying to impress someone," she teased. He laughed quietly. "You don't need to try." The words hung between them, weighty and unspoken. Mira looked away first, her heart thudding against her ribs. Later, while Nolan rode the carousel, they stood near a fire pit sipping cider. "Can I ask you something?" Harlen said, staring into the flames. "Of course." "Why do you come to practice early?" She didn't answer right away. "Because I want to see you." He turned to her, surprised. "I like talking to you," she said. "Being around you. It's different from everything else in my life." He nodded slowly, processing. "I feel like I know you," he said after a pause. "But sometimes it's like there's something you're not telling me." Mira's breath caught. He looked at her, not accusing, just open. "That's not a bad thing, just sometimes I wonder." She forced a smile. "I guess we all have things we're not ready to say yet." Harlen nodded, accepting that. But Mira knew the clock was ticking. Because the truth was, she wasn't just someone who liked cider and soccer fields. She had board members who would lose their minds if they knew she was skipping quarterly meetings for hayrides and hot drinks. And Harlen was looking at her like she was someone real. Someone simple. And that wasn't who she was. Not really. Not yet. The call came just after midnight, dragging Mira out of a shallow sleep. She stared at the vibrating phone on her nightstand, saw the name, and let out a sharp breath through her nose. She didn't answer, not until the third ring. "You disappeared," said a clipped voice on the other end. "I've rescheduled the Zurich call 3 times." "I needed a break," Mira said evenly. her voice low so it wouldn't echo through the quiet apartment. "You don't get to need a break," the voice snapped. "You're not an intern, you're Olson Dynamics." She hung up without responding. Her reflection in the dark window stared back at her. Hair mussed, jaw clenched, eyes too tired for someone who had everything. But Mira didn't feel powerful tonight. She felt torn, and for the first time in years, she didn't know what she was going to do next. The next morning, she told her driver not to follow her, pulled on a plain gray hoodie, and caught the early train toward the construction site Harlen had mentioned offhandedly over coffee. He hadn't invited her, but she remembered the name of the street. It was a long shot. She didn't care. She found him on a scaffold, hammering something into place with his back turned. The sound of metal against wood echoed around the unfinished frame of what would eventually be a school gym. He didn't notice her until she called his name. Harlen looked over his shoulder, then blinked. "Mira." She offered a wave, awkward. "I was in the area." He climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You okay?" She nodded but didn't speak right away. The wind pushed her hair across her face. "I wanted to see where you work," she said finally. "Where you are when you're not coaching or tying Nolan's shoes." He studied her for a long moment. "It's nothing special." "I think it is," she said. "You build things that last." Harlen glanced back at the rising frame behind him. Sometimes it lasts. Sometimes they tear it down in 5 years and put up something shinier. Mira stepped closer. "Still, you made something real." He looked at her then, brows slightly furrowed. "What's going on?" She hesitated. "I have to tell you something." Harlen didn't interrupt. He waited. "I haven't been honest about who I am," she said. "Not because I wanted to lie. I just liked being someone else with you." He folded his arms but said nothing. "My name is Mira Olson," she continued. "I run Olson Dynamics. It's a tech firm, a big one." He was silent for a long time. Then, finally, "That's why you never talk about work." She nodded. "And the way you dress, the car, the phone that never stops buzzing." He exhaled once through his nose, his jaw working. "You're not just doing okay, you're one of those people who owns half the skyline." "I didn't want that to matter," she said quickly. "I liked who I was with you, just a mom on the sidelines." "I liked her too," he said, "but she wasn't real." Mira's stomach twisted. "I didn't lie about how I feel," she said. "Not once." "You just left out the part where you're a billionaire." "I thought if I told you, everything would change." "Well," Harlen said, stepping back, "you were right." He turned and walked toward the site, picked up his gloves, and climbed back onto the scaffold. Mira stood there for another minute, then turned and walked away. That night, she found Nyla asleep on the couch, curled around a stuffed fox she'd had since she was 3. Mira tucked a blanket over her, then stood in the kitchen staring at the floor for a long time. She didn't hear her assistant come in through the side door until the sound of heels clicking broke through the silence. "I canceled your week," the woman said. "Zurich, Brussels, the gala, everything." "Thanks." "You're not okay," her assistant said. "No," Mira replied, "but I think I'm finally being honest." The following Monday, Harlen picked Nolan up from school and found a crisp envelope in his son's backpack. No note, just a printed invitation to a fundraiser dinner for a nonprofit that built schools in low-income neighborhoods. And across the bottom, handwritten in blue ink, "I'll be the one not wearing a mask this time." He stared at it for a long time, then folded it and slipped it into his back pocket. On Friday, Harlen stood outside the entrance to the glass-paneled venue wearing the only suit he owned, one he hadn't worn since his brother's wedding. He felt like a fraud, until he saw her. Mira was standing near a display table, her hair pulled back, makeup understated, dress elegant but simple. She looked like the woman from the soccer field, the one who drank juice boxes and made his son laugh. When she saw him, her face stilled. "You came," she said, walking toward him. He looked around. "This place is something." "I didn't ask you here to impress you." "Then why?" "I wanted to show you I'm not hiding anymore." Harlen nodded slowly, then glanced past her to the display on the wall photos of children in schools made from repurposed wood and salvaged beams. "You built these?" he asked. "We fund them, but I want to do more. Real building, not just writing checks." He looked at her, really looked, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I don't care about your money, Mira." "I know. I care that you didn't trust me with the truth." "I'm trying to now." A beat passed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the invitation. "You wrote this." She nodded. Harlen held it up. "Then this is you trying, so I'm here." She blinked, a little stunned. "I'm not saying I get it yet," he said, "but I want to. Even if I'm not who you thought." "I think you're still exactly who I thought. You just come with a few extra zeros." She laughed, breathless, and for the first time in days, her eyes didn't look tired. He stepped closer. "You scared me." "I scared myself." "Don't do that again." "I won't," she promised. Then, without thinking, Harlen reached for her hand. And Mira let him. The next weekend rolled in with the kind of soft spring warmth that made the grass shimmer and small children impossible to corral. Nolan was halfway through building a makeshift fort out of orange cones on the sideline, and Nyla was spinning barefoot in the sun near the benches. Mira stood a few feet away, eyes on Harlen, who was crouched beside the kids with a clipboard and a whistle slung around his neck. He was officially coaching, now volunteered. No pay, and somehow the entire team had started showing up. Mira waited until the last parent left before walking up to him. Nolan and Nyla were playing tag nearby, shrieking with laughter. "I was thinking about something," she said, shifting her weight, nervous without knowing why. Harlen stood, brushing his palms together. "That usually means you're about to ask a serious question." "I've never had anyone ask me what I actually want. Not professionally, not personally. People expect me to already know." He studied her for a moment. "Do you?" "Not always," she admitted. "But I do know I don't want us to stay in this weird in-between forever." Harlen nodded once. "You mean standing on soccer fields pretending this doesn't feel different than anything else?" "Exactly." He glanced at the kids, then back to her. "I've been thinking, too, about what it would take to really fit into your life, and what it would take for you to fit into mine." Mira exhaled. "I don't want to fit you into mine. I want to build something new." Harlan's head tilted slightly. "You'd walk away from all of it." "I already have, in pieces. I stepped down from 2 boards last week." His eyes widened slightly. "That's big." "I want to start something that matters, not just to shareholders, to people, to kids like Nolan and Nyla." Harlen folded his arms, watching her more carefully now. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I bought a property," she said quickly, before nerves could stop her. "A few miles from here, an old community center that's been boarded up for years." He blinked. "You bought it?" "I want to renovate it. Make it a place for families, after-school programs, tutoring, sports. But I don't want to hand it off to a contractor I'll never meet. I want you to build it with me." He was quiet for so long, she almost filled the silence herself. But then he stepped closer, voice low. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a future," she said, "one we design together." He looked away for a long moment, squinting at the field. "You sure you want to do this with someone like me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Because someone like you is the only person who's ever made me feel like could be more than a title." He turned back to her, and all the doubt that had been lingering in his eyes for weeks since the truth came out, since the gala, since the invitation finally gave way to something steadier. You really don't care what it looks like from the outside. I've been on the outside of my own life for years, she said. I'm done building things that don't have you in them. Harlan's shoulders eased, and something in his expression shifted less guarded, more open. All right, he said, let's build something that lasts. A week later, they stood in front of the crumbling brick building on Oak Avenue, with blueprints spread across the hood of Harlan's truck. Nalan and Nyla were drawing chalk murals on the sidewalk, while Mira held a clipboard and Harlen measured the doorframe. You're the only person I've ever seen carry a clipboard and a power drill, he said, grinning as he watched her scribble notes. You're the only person who makes construction tape look like a fashion accessory. They worked side by side for hours. He demoed old drywall, she cataloged materials. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like foundation being laid. That night, they sat on the unfinished steps of the building, watching the kids chase fireflies through the overgrown grass. Mira leaned against his shoulder, hair tied back, cheeks streaked with a little dust. Do you think we're crazy for doing this? She asked. No, Harlen said. I think it's the first thing that's made sense in a long time. Even with everything that's different between us. We both show up, he said. That's the only thing that matters. She turned her head toward him. I want this to be permanent. I do too. Then, without hesitation, Harlen reached into the side pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small, square box. Mira froze. What is that? He opened it to reveal a ring not flashy, no diamonds, just a simple gold band with a small engraving inside. It's not from a boutique, he said. I made it myself. Cut it from a piece of brass I saved from the first house ever built. She stared at it, stunned. I don't have a yacht or a private jet, he said, but I've got this, and I've got us, and I don't want to wait another minute to ask. Mira's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She reached for the ring, turning it over in her fingers. What's the engraving? He angled it toward the light. It read, You showed up. She laughed, shaking her head. Of course it does. Harlen took her hand, steady and warm. Mira Olson, will you marry me? She nodded before her voice could work. Yes, yes, I will. From the grass, Nalan and Nyla let out cheers that echoed down the quiet street. 6 months later, the community center opened with a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by every family in the county. Nalan and Nyla were the first through the doors, dragging their backpacks and laughing as they raced to the reading room. The building had gym floors that gleamed and ceilings Harlen had patched with his own hands. Mira had funded every inch, but she'd made sure his name was on the cornerstone. Brooks Family Center, the plaque read. After the ceremony, Harlen pulled her aside beneath the archway. You really gave everything up for this. No, she said, taking his hand. I didn't give anything up. Finally got everything I wanted. And as Nalan tugged on his sleeve and Nyla slipped her hand into Mira's, they walked through the doors together into a life they had built from the ground up. The day of the wedding dawned with a sky the color of soft linen and a breeze that carried the scent of lilacs from the nearby orchard. The Brooks Family Center, the very place they'd built together, had been transformed. Twinkling lights hung from the exposed beams above the courtyard, and rows of wildflowers lined the aisle that cut between handmade wooden benches. Nothing about it was ostentatious, no marble fountains or imported crystal, but it was warm, genuine, and unmistakably theirs. Harlen stood near the front, adjusting the cuffs of his navy vest. He hadn't wanted a tuxedo. It didn't feel like him. But Mira had chosen the vest and paired it with an open, collared white shirt, and when he'd looked in the mirror, he'd felt more like a groom than he ever expected. Nalan, standing beside him as his best man, was practically vibrating with excitement. His tie was crooked and his shoes were already scuffed, but Harlen didn't fix either. He liked him exactly as he was. "You nervous?" Nalan asked, tugging at his cuffs. "Not even a little." "Really?" Harlen bent to his level. "You know when you build something and everything fits together just right, like it was always supposed to be that way." "Yeah. That's what this feels like." As Nalan nodded, Mira stepped out from the center's side doors and every head turned. She wore a dress that flowed like water, simple, ivory, and sleeveless, with a thin gold ribbon at her waist. Her hair was swept off her face, pinned with a sprig of baby's breath. There were no diamonds, no veil, just her. Harlen forgot to breathe for a second. Nyla, walking ahead of her with a small basket of petals, kept turning around to check if Mira was still following. When she reached the end of the path, she gave Harlen a solemn nod, as if approving her mother's choice. As Mira reached him, Harlen reached for her hand with a steadiness that made her chest ache. The minister began speaking, but neither of them paid attention to the words. They were caught in each other's eyes, in the unspoken vows they'd already lived before this day. "You look like the beginning of everything good," Harlen whispered. "And you look like home," she replied. They exchanged rings, his still the brass band he'd made, hers a matching one he'd crafted from the same sheet of metal. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nalan whooped, Nyla clapped, and the entire audience rose to their feet, cheering. Later, they danced beneath the stars in the courtyard, where the kids had once played tag, while plaster dust swirled through broken windows. Now, the center pulsed with music from a local band, laughter, and the clinking of glasses filled with cider and champagne. Mira rested her head on Harlen's shoulder as they swayed. "People used to ask me what I was building," she said quietly. "Now I know." "This," Harlen said, his voice low, "all of this." Around them, children darted between tables. Nalan and Nyla had teamed up to organize a game involving glow sticks and an empty lemonade pitcher. Harlen pulled Mira closer, his hand warm against her spine. "You ever think about adding to the chaos?" he asked, voice casual. She looked up at him, caught off guard. "You mean?" "I mean," he said, brushing his thumb along her cheekbone, "you and me. A little brother or sister for them, if you want." Mira blinked, the question settling in her chest like sunlight. "I never thought I'd want more," she said, "but with you, I want everything." He kissed her then. There was no fanfare, no applause, no camera flashes. Just the quiet certainty of two people who had fought for something real and built it with their bare hands. Months passed, and the center bloomed. It became more than a place, it became a heartbeat in the community. Harlen led carpentry workshops on Saturdays, his classes filled with teenagers who'd never held a hammer before. Mira launched a scholarship program from a small office in the back, determined to give kids like Nalan and Nyla every opportunity she hadn't had growing up. They kept their lives grounded. No private jets, no press releases, just family dinners in the backyard, board games on rainy Sundays, and weekend camping trips where they left their phones behind. One morning, Mira stood in the kitchen barefoot, the sunlight casting golden stripes across the tile. Harlen was at the stove flipping pancakes, Nalan at the table drawing blueprints for a treehouse, Nyla braiding her doll's hair beside him. Mira held a small white envelope in her hand. He turned, saw her expression, and immediately flipped off the burner. "You okay?" She walked over, pressed the envelope into his palm. He opened it slowly. Inside was a grainy black and white image, small and perfectly shaped. He looked up, eyes wide. "Are you?" She nodded, eyes shining. 8 weeks. Harlen crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, cradling her like She was made of glass and fire all at once. The kids didn't understand at first, but when they did, Nolan jumped up shouting, "Yes, I'm gonna teach the baby everything." Nyla asked if she could name it. The months that followed were filled with change. A nursery took shape in the small room off their bedroom, painted in soft greens and yellows. Harlen built the crib himself, carved their initials into the bottom rail. Mira slowed down for the first time in her life, finding joy in walks through the park, afternoon naps, and the way Harlan's hand never strayed far from her belly. When the baby came a girl with her mother's eyes, and her father's easy smile, they named her Elodie. She was born on a rainy morning, and Harlen held her first, whispering promises into the curve of her ear. Mira watched them, exhausted and glowing, her heart stretched wider than she thought possible. Years later, the Brooks Family Center stood stronger than ever. New wings had been added. The reading room now bore Mira's mother's name, a quiet tribute to the woman who taught her to dream. The gym had Harlan's original plans framed on the wall, signed by every person who'd helped build it. And at the heart of it all was the Brooks family: Harlen, Mira, Nolan, Nyla, and little Elodie laughing under the same roof they'd built. Not just with brick and beam, but with trust, forgiveness, and the kind of love that didn't need to be loud to be extraordinary. They hadn't found their happily ever after in a penthouse or a fairy tale. They'd built it. Together,